Imagine discovering a book that correctly identified the gender of specific animals more than 1,400 years before modern biology existed. Sounds impossible, right? Because back then there were no microscopes, no laboratories, no scientific journals, and certainly no way to examine insects and determine whether the ones doing the work were male or female. Yet the Quran repeatedly describes certain creatures using very specific grammatical forms, sometimes feminine, sometimes masculine. At first glance, that might not seem important, but here's where it gets interesting. Modern science has since revealed that the bee collecting nectar is female. The ant protecting the colony is female. The spider building the web is female. And astonishingly, the Quran refers to all of them as female. Coincidence? Maybe. But what happens when the pattern keeps repeating? Today we're looking at 6 remarkable examples where the Quran appears to identify the gender of animals centuries before science could verify it. And by the end of this video, you'll have to decide for yourself. Was this simply luck? Or was there something far more extraordinary going on? Before we jump in, there's something important you need to know. Unlike English, Arabic assigns gender to words, and that doesn't stop with nouns. Verbs also change depending on whether the subject is male or female. That means when the Quran uses a feminine verb, it's not random. It's making a specific choice. And when it uses a masculine verb, that's a specific choice too. Now, here's the question. If these choices were made over 14 centuries ago, how often did they get it right? Let's find out. Keep watching until the end, only on 1 Degree Closer. Let's start with one of the most famous examples, the bee. In Surah Nahl, Allah describes the bee receiving inspiration. Build your homes in the mountains, the trees, and in what people construct. Then eat from the fruits and follow the paths your Lord has made easy for you. Seems straightforward, but hidden inside the Arabic is something fascinating. The commands eat and follow are both written in the feminine form. In other words, the bee being addressed is female. Now ask yourself, if you lived 1,400 years ago, would you know whether the bee gathering nectar was male or female? Of course not. Most people wouldn't even think about it, but modern biology has given us the answer. The worker bees that collect nectar, the bees that make honey, the bees that build and maintain the hive are all female. The males, called drones, their role is almost entirely reproductive. So the bees actually performing the actions described in the Quran are female. Now let's move to another tiny creature, the ant. And this one might be even more surprising. In Surah Naml, Prophet Sulaiman alayhis salam is traveling with his army when the Quran tells us that an ant spotted the approaching forces. Immediately, the ant warned the others, "O ants, enter your homes so that Solomon and his armies do not crush you without realizing it." The ant is described using feminine grammar, not masculine. Feminine. Why? Well, modern entomology gives us an interesting answer. The ants responsible for gathering food, building tunnels, caring for the young, and protecting the colony are almost always female worker ants. They're the ones constantly active. They're the ones making decisions. They're the ones keeping the colony alive, exactly how the Quran describes it. This wasn't written after the invention of microscopes. Male ants' primary role is reproduction, rather than managing the daily activities of the colony. Now let's talk about one of the most famous animal references in the entire Quran, the spider. In Surah Ankabut, Allah gives a powerful example. The example of those who take protectors besides Allah is like the spider who builds a house. Most people focus on the spiritual lesson, but there's another fascinating detail. The spider is described using feminine grammar. Again, not masculine. Now here's what modern science tells us. The spider that builds and maintains the web is generally the female. Male spiders are often much smaller. Many don't build webs at all. Their primary purpose is reproduction. The architect, the builder, the one creating the web, is typically female, and that's exactly the spider being described. But there's another layer. The verse doesn't just identify the correct gender. It also calls the spider's house the weakest of homes. Think about that. A spider web looks impressive, complex, beautiful, perfectly designed. Yet one touch can destroy it. One gust of wind can tear it apart. The lesson? Not everything that looks strong actually is. Sometimes what appears secure is incredibly fragile, a scientific observation and a spiritual lesson combined in a single verse. Now things get really interesting, because for the first 3 examples, the Quran used feminine language, but now it switches. Still in Surah Naml, Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam notices that one of his birds is missing, the hoopoe. Then suddenly the bird returns with shocking news. It says, "I have learned something you do not know. I have come to you from Shaba with certain information." This time the Quran uses masculine grammar, not feminine, masculine. So why the change? Researchers studying hoopoes have noticed something interesting. Male hoopoes tend to be more exploratory. They travel farther. They patrol larger territories. They are often more active when it comes to scouting and investigating. Now think about the story. The hoopoe flies a long distance, discovers an entire kingdom, observes its rulers, collects intelligence, returns with a detailed report. That behavior aligns remarkably well with the role of the male hoopoe. Once again, the grammatical choice matches the behavior observed in nature. And once again, the match appears centuries before modern ornithology existed. Next comes a creature that played a major role in the story of Prophet Saleh alayhi salam, the miraculous camel sent as a sign to the people of Thamud. The Quran doesn't simply call it a camel, it specifically calls it a she-camel, a female camel. Now, that might seem like a minor detail, but in Arabian culture, female camels were extraordinarily valuable. They produced milk, they were essential for survival, they were prized possessions. In many cases, a female camel was worth far more than a male. So the sign sent to the people wasn't just any animal, it was something precious, something valuable, something they were commanded to respect. Yet despite the miracle they witnessed, they disobeyed. And the consequences were devastating. Even here, the Quran's wording is precise. Not merely camel, specifically she-camel. Now for our final example, the story of Prophet Yunus alayhi salam, the great fish, the prophet swallowed by a great sea creature. The Quran tells us that a massive fish swallowed him. And interestingly, the verb used is masculine, not feminine, masculine. Now, scholars have debated exactly what type of creature it was. Many discussions point toward large whales because of their immense size. And here's where things get fascinating. Among sperm whales, males are dramatically larger than females, much larger. They dive deeper, travel farther, and can reach sizes that dwarf their female counterparts. If a creature were large enough to swallow a human whole, a male would be the more likely candidate. And the Quran's grammar once again points in that direction, masculine, just as we'd expect. The big question. So let's step back for a moment. What have we seen? The bee, female. The ant, female. The spider, female. The hoopoe, male. The she-camel, female. The great fish, male. Different animals, different environments, different stories. Yet every time the Quran refers to them, the grammatical choice appears deliberate and remarkably consistent. Now here's the question. How did a book revealed in 7th century Arabia repeatedly align with biological realities that would only become clear centuries later? No microscopes, no insect laboratories, no marine biology, no zoology, no modern taxonomy. Yet these descriptions continue to raise questions. Could all of them be coincidences? Maybe one, maybe two. But as the examples accumulate, the explanation becomes harder and harder to dismiss. And that's why many believers see these verses as signs. Not because the Quran is a science textbook, it isn't. Its purpose is guidance. But every now and then, it contains details that seem to point beyond the knowledge available at the time. Details waiting centuries to be noticed, centuries to be understood, centuries to be appreciated. Allah says in Surah Fussilat, "We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth." If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves, because the deeper we look, the more fascinating the discoveries become. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.